Well, hello and welcome. We
Hi.
already have some viewers. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. This is a session called Strong Five Responding to a Kid in Crisis. And this is going to be coming from Coach's new book, second edition, chapter 20. My name is Andre Deshotel, and I'm on the Whole Brain Teaching Executive Board. I'm also an educator, admin, behavior coach in Louisiana, and I am joined by two phenomenal humans, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and I'll hand off to Dawn.
Hi. Thanks. My name's Dawn McGregor. I teach first grade in Lamars, Iowa, and I'm a platinum certified whole brain teacher.
All right, Weston.
Hi, my name is Weston Lamb Costantino, and I am a gold certified music teacher here in Wyoming.
All right, and thank you both for being here with me. All right, so we are going to dive right into this session. We are going to have Weston take the backstage. He'll be running the comments, and then Dawn and I will lead this session. So here we go. I'm going to begin right here with this slide. And if you're interested in getting these slides that we're going to share with you, I do have a link, and I know Weston is going to pop that in the chat so that you can get access to these slides. All right, let's begin. I figured this was pretty important, Dawn. It's on page 1 of the new book, right? So it's got to be significant. It is the whole brain teaching formula, which is only connect. And it comes to us from an English novelist, E.M. Forster. And when I really think about this formula, only connect, I really feel that whole brain teaching is super intentional about weaving this formula through all of its systems and strategies. And you can see it presented in Fiverr, Super Improvers, and even Strong Five. And if you really think about this motto, only connect, it makes total sense, Dawn, right? Because as humans, we are relational beings by nature. We are neurobiologically wired up for connection. And it's through our relationships, our attachments, our bonds that a child learns to develop emotional regulation, which is going to be a pretty big topic in our Strong Five sessions. So we're going to be really intentional about weaving this only connect formula throughout our Strong Five sessions. And I believe it's going to be the heartbeat of these sessions. And I also want to add this. It's important that we acknowledge that the best chance in supporting a kid in crisis is to do what we can to maintain and protect that bond. And in so many cases, for that kid in crisis, you, the teacher, you might be that kid's safest, most secure attachment in their life. And that's pretty profound. So, on the flip, we also recognize that as a teacher, we're also human. Dawn, you're human, right?
I am.
Just
Yeah.
checking. All right. And as a human, we also have our own emotions to cope and deal with. And so we're going to hold space for, well, what happens if a teacher is in the classroom and their tolerance tank is empty? How do they show up for that kid in that moment? So we're going to cover all bases. Let's dive right on in. Now, I was inspired by Crystal Long's Wonder Word sessions that she did over the weekend. So I had to throw them into our session questions. And we're going to unpack them very quickly with some magic circle style. All right, so here we go, Dawn. Strong Five class.
Strong five. Yes.
Silent mirrors. Shh.
Silent mutes.
Who is a kid in crisis? So we're going to look at how do we define a kid who is in crisis through a neurological lens, and we'll be pretty general about it. Number 2, what is Strong Five? What is Strong Five? In what situation am I going to use Strong Five in my classroom? Number 3, when do I use Strong Five? When do I employ this strategy? Well, it's going to come down to really assessing risk, and we'll go into that. And then question number 4 is, how do I use the Strong Five strategy? So we're going to unpack the 3 phases that help us implement this strategy. All right, mirrors off. let's dive right in, Dawn, with question number one. Who was a kid in crisis? Now, as you can see right here, pretty general definition. A kid in crisis has temporarily lost access to reason, impulse control, and most language. All right. So essentially, the thinking brain, Dawn, has gotten offline, right? And now they're using these lower centers of their brain. And in these lower centers, they have access to a more primitive state where there are these survival skills that perhaps could present themselves in the classroom: fight, flight, and freeze. So, Dawn, can you throw back at us what we mean by a kid in crisis? Handoff, Dawn.
All right, thanks, Andre. So a kid in crisis is someone who has a temporary loss of access to reason, impulse control, and language. They're kind of in that fight, flight, just natural response when you're experiencing high emotions.
That's it. Thanks, Dawn. And we're going to unpack what we mean more specifically about this in terms of two broad behavior categories. So we have something called low level behaviors and something called high level behaviors. And a low level behavior could be presented in the sense of a kid is head down crying at their desk. It could be a kid who is hiding underneath their desk. Maybe they're scribbling on their work. Those are low level behaviors. They're not posing a significant threat to safety. But we also have high level behaviors, and those are things that do pose a risk factor, right? And so those behaviors could look like a kid running out of the classroom. It could look like materials being thrown. It could look like furniture being flipped. So, Dawn, can you sum up for us what we mean by these low level behaviors and these high level behaviors? Hand off.
Sure, thanks, Andre. So low level behaviors are something that's not super disruptive. Maybe their heads are down, they're scribbling, and then those high level behaviors are where it's super disruptive. Desks are being tipped over, things are being knocked down.
You got it. All right, so we're going to look at a kid's brain that is in crisis. And we're going to do it very simplistically by looking at the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. Let's start off, Dawn, with the upstairs brain. Now, it is the upstairs brain right up here that we have access to our best skill set. It's our executive skills. And upstairs, we can do things like think rationally, use logic. We have stronger focus and attention. We can emotionally regulate our behavior. So a lot of executive skills are presented in that way. Now, Dawn, can you sum back up for us what we mean by the upstairs brain and what are some of those executive skills that we can see presented?
Sure. Thanks, Andre. So those upstairs brain are those executive skills. When we're able to think and process, it's that prefrontal cortex that helps us make those great decisions.
You got it. And then in contrast, we have the downstairs brain where there's a different skill set. So class.
Yes.
Mirror words.
Mirror words.
In the downstairs brain.
In the downstairs brain.
When the upstairs.
When the upstairs
is offline,
I'm
going to use a skill set.
I'm going to use a skill set
that tries
to
secure my safety. It might be irrational.
But
it's the skill set I have. Blaming. Whining. Complaining. And some other more significant behaviors. Biting, running, kicking. And maybe flipping. Mirrors off. All right, so Dawn, we kind of uncovered some of those downstairs skills. Can you give us some of those back?
Sure. It might be just sitting, whining, blaming, crying, or more stronger behaviors like throwing, running around, rolling on the classroom, flipping things over.
You got it. All right. So we have to also go into this emotional crisis storm with this idea that this kid is not using their executive skills. And so when we really see that a kid in crisis is using the skill set they have available to them in that moment, whether they're survival skills, we're going to respond very intentionally and hopefully effectively with that lens. Now, our second Wonder Words question is, what is Strong Five? So essentially, Strong Five is a plan for crisis episodes in your classroom. Now, obviously, we want to be sensitive to everyone's own specific um, district and school policies and protocols for how to handle a kid in crisis. Um, but we're going to speak very generally about the approach that Strong Five is suggesting. Okay. So that was point number three. I'm going to back up to point number two right here. So, point number two says during a crisis, there are three variables. Two of the three the teacher can greatly manipulate. Mirror words.
Mirror words.
In a crisis,
In a crisis,
there are three variables.
there are three variables.
First variable,
First variable,
me, the teacher.
me, the teacher.
Second variable,
Second variable,
the kid in crisis,
the kid in crisis,
functioning from the downstairs brain.
functioning from the downstairs brain.
Third variable,
Third variable,
the rest of my class.
the rest of my class.
Two of those variables
Two of those variables
are very likely in my control.
are very likely in my control.
Mirrors off.
Mirrors off.
Dawn, I'm going to have you make a prediction. Which of those variables, teacher, kid in crisis, or the rest of the class, is the variable that I have the least control over?
I'm going to go with the kid in crisis.
The kid in crisis. Yes, you are spot on with that. Again, they are using an irrational part of their brain. So behaviors are going to be unpredictable. And so that is the variable that I have the least control over, right? So I want to pour my intentions on the two variables that I have the most control over, and that is me, the teacher, and the rest of my class. And we'll get into exactly what that means very soon. All right. When do I use Strong Five? Well, this is our next question, and we use it when we assess that behavior poses a risk to safety and it needs quick intervention. And again, this goes back to following those school-wide policies for this occasion, right? So we're going to be really looking at what could happen in this moment and really understanding this kid's history, perhaps, and how they've kind of handled some of their emotions before will determine the next step for you, right? Now, this next one is where we're going to spend a lot of our time, all right? So number 4 is how, with steps, do I use Strong Five? And we do have 3 phases, but they all have one common goal, Dawn, and that common goal is safety. All right, so 3 phases with one goal, and it's safety. So Dawn, tell us back what we're talking about in terms of how do I use Strong Five?
All right, thanks, Andre. With Strong Five, there's going to be 3 phases. All of them have the same connection, and that is safety.
You got it. All right, so what are those 3 phases? Well, we're going to do an overview of them right here. Phase 1 is going to mobilize your class, right? Remember that variable we talked about, which is the rest of your class, everyone but the kid in crisis? You're going to mobilize them very structurally and specifically, and we'll get into what that looks like soon. Phase 2 is really attuning to the teacher, the adult's nervous system, doing some active calming so that we can show up for the kid in crisis with some empathy and some validation, which will really help to absorb the emotion in that moment. And then phase 3, we're going to present 2 positive choices, each leading to a more leading to a safer outcome. Let's put it that way. So Dawn, can you kind of sum up very generally what we have here in these 3 Strong Five phases? Handoff.
All right, thanks, Andre. So phase 1 is calling out Strong Five, and that's going to get the rest of your class doing the Strong Five process. So then you can proceed to phase 2, which is focusing on the teacher, your active calming, getting ready to empathize with the student. And then phase 3 is providing the student in crisis with 2 positive choices that's going to get them in a more safe environment.
You got it, Dawn. Thanks for that summary. All right, so right here we have a graphic, and it's called the teacher role during Strong Five. So I want to back things up just a bit before we just jump into crisis mode, right? So here we have a trigger being presented. It's intense behavior, perhaps, and that could look like a kid maybe flipping over their chair. Let's just say it's a kid who's flipping over their chair. You just tried to start math, and that's the behavior they present. The first thing we're going to do before we do anything is just pause, right? We're going to give ourselves that pause, and then we're going to ask ourselves, do I have the capacity in this moment to show up for this kid right now? And if the answer is yes, boom, I'm running into those three phases of Strong Five. But sometimes the answer is no. Now, if it's flipping over a chair, perhaps we're going to go into safety mode. But if it is a more low level behavior, like maybe it is a kid who is crying at their desk and they're complaining about doing work, let's call it that. Then if I say, you know what, I don't have the capacity to give my best self to this student right now, then I'm going to go into something called strategic retreats. And I want to talk very specifically about what this means. So strategic retreat looks something like this. Again, this is you, the teacher, recognizing that I don't have a steady, calm composure to bring to this kid right now, but I still want to acknowledge the experience that's going on. Okay. So it would look something like this. So here's your kid. They're whining and complaining about math. You walk over to them. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get low. I'm going to try to match their position. If they're sitting down, I'm squatting. And I'm going to sort of tilt my head like this just to soften my approach. And I'm going to say, I'm feeling upset. You deserve the best from me. We'll talk about this later. So one more time. I go, I match their position. I tilt the head. I'm feeling upset. You deserve the best from me. We'll talk about this later. So let's unpack that. But first, let's hear it back from Dawn. Dawn, can you give us the 3 strategic retreat lines, handoff?
Yeah, thank you. I love this. When you introduced this idea, I'm like, this, no one has ever told me that this was an okay thing to do.
Right.
So, strategic retreat. If I feel like right now I am not emotionally ready to handle this, I need to still address it with my student. So I'm going to get down low, get to their level, tilt my head, and say, I'm feeling upset. You deserve the best from me. We'll talk about this later.
That's it. And it's so powerful because what we're doing in this moment is we're modeling what emotional regulation looks like in front of that student. And that's exactly what that kid needs more of, more experiences of an adult who is showing them how to manage their big emotions. And so let's unpack that. So we have, I'm feeling upset. So perhaps when you tell your student, hey, I'm feeling upset. Yes, your teacher is also a human who experiences a myriad of emotions just like you, kid. That is a very connecting experience in itself, right? Because in that moment, that kid is going to recognize that, wow, my teacher is also a human. They're feeling upset right now. Let me see what they do next, right? And all of that might be happening subconsciously, but it's still very powerful. And so I'm feeling upset is naming it to tame it. And as soon as I say it and I speak it out loud, I'm already one step closer to getting back to a more harmonious state. And then second line is, you deserve the best from me. This is probably my favorite line because it is communicating respect in perhaps a very disrespectful time where emotions are heightened. And so telling that student, you deserve the best from me. And right now, I don't really have that to offer, but I'm going to make sure I come back and give it to you. Right. And then our third line, we will talk about this later, says, you know what? I'm going to wait until I have access to my reason. You have access to your reason, and then we will discuss exactly what is happening in this situation. So that is strategic retreat. So Dawn, one more time, can you kind of unpack very briefly these 3 lines? Handoff, Dawn.
All right, thank you. So the first one is acknowledging your feelings and letting your students know you're human. You have feelings too. So you're going to acknowledge and say, I'm feeling upset. The second thing is probably one of the most powerful. When you say, you deserve the best from me, it's keeping that connection and really showing the students a lot of respect. And then the third part is we're going to talk about this later. So that student and everybody else sees that you are going to address it, just not right now.
You got it, Dawn. And just to add on this extra point, strategic retreat is going to work great for, again, those low level behaviors. If they are the big level behaviors, again, we're going to have to take a more direct action.
Thanks.
But, I was thinking you could almost use this strategic retreat even when you're not actually, upset, right? Um, as just a way to give that kid who often presents these big emotions, just to give them those little micro experiences of, "Ooh, watch what I do when I feel myself getting upset as the adult." So kind of weaving that in strategically might be a good thing for that kid. All right, so let's go back to our little teacher role graphic. A behavior is presented. I ask myself, do I have the capacity? And you know what, Dawn? I had a nice 6.5 hours of quality sleep last night. And my foamy latte was on point this morning, Dawn. And I'm even wearing a new top. So you better believe I'm feeling really good and I'm ready for this emotional storm. So I go right over and I start implementing the 3 phases of Strong Five. Let's unpack the first one. So right here, we're going to be talking all about phase one, um, which is essentially, again, mobilizing your class with the goal of safety in mind. Okay. So the teacher is going to do a few things on the front end before this takes place. All right. And so what those things are, number one is you want to select a predetermined location in your classroom. It could even be the hallway where your kids that are not part of the crisis are going to move to, right? So that they are safe. So that's the first thing you're going to want to do on the front end is select that safe location for your setting. The second thing is going to be you want to select a strong five student leader because they're going to have a really important role with the group in this predetermined safe location. So we have select a safe spot. We have select a strong five leader. And the third thing is we want to practice this as a drill. And we're going to talk more about that. So 3 things: safe spot, student leader, and practice. So Dawn, can you tell us the 3 things that are going to happen on the front end handoff?
All right, thanks. So the 3 things that are going to happen on the front end of this is you need to have a safe spot for the rest of your students to go. The second one is to pick the strong five leader. And then the third one just escaped me. I forgot.
No, you're still cool. The third one is, let's see if I even remember it. Oh, you're going to want to practice this.
Practice. Oh, yes. Practice is like a fire drill, tornado drill. You will eventually practice strong fives. Your students know what to do before it actually happens.
You got it, Dawn. And this quote right out of the book, practice episodes reduce the chaos produced by real episodes. Very powerful. So what we're saying here is just as we would practice a fire drill, a tornado drill, we're going to take that same response when it comes to emotional storms in the classroom. And of course, allow your teacher intuition to guide this, right? Now, in the book, it does say during this practice drill, you would select a student to role play. And what are they role playing? This one kid is role playing, I'm upset, I'm upset. And then that allows you to kind of go over the routine, call out strong five. Your students repeat it back to you, strong five, strong five, strong five, as they are moving to that safe spot. And then you walk over to the kid who was role playing, I'm upset, and you get down low and you start practicing how you're going to implement phases 2 and 3. And it's just a quick little 60 to 90-minute drill. So that way, if you actually have to employ strong five, there's some order to the chaos that is ensuing right before your eyes, right? And so that's really important to consider. And again, allow that teacher intuition to guide how this unfolds for you and your students. So Dawn, can you explain back what we're doing very generally in Strong Five Phase 1?
Yes, thank you. So this is practicing the beginning part. You're going to make sure your students know where they go, where they're safe. You're going to have your strong five leader, and you'll practice calling out strong five as they're three-peating, strong five, strong five, strong five. They're moving to wherever that safe place is as you're starting to go work with a student in crisis. And this is the teaching part. So you're just picking one student to model just by saying, I'm upset, I'm upset, I'm upset. And this little practice should only take 30 to 90 seconds.
Absolutely. And you could also practice this as not necessarily mobilizing your students to go to another area. They can stay at their seats. This could still work at their seats. Again, it all depends on the situation, right? What that crisis looks like. So keep that in mind as well. Now, what is the group of kids doing whenever they are in this safe spot or at their desk, whenever Strong Five is taking place? We know what the teacher is doing, right? They're responding to the kid in crisis. Maybe they've called for backup, someone in the school building that can come and offer some assistance. Everyone else is being led by that student Strong Five leader. And what are they doing? We're going to break it down right here. It is called a Strong Five power rehearsal, Dawn. And it takes our traditional, typical rule rehearsal, but it emphasizes, and this is where the name really comes from, rule number 5, which is make our dear team stronger, right? And so, right here in this rehearsal, we have rule 1, but they don't move to rule 2. It's rule 1, then rule 5, then rule 2, then rule 5, then rule 3. And it follows that sequence, embedding rule 5 after each rule, just to really emphasize that we are a team right now and we're working together to be stronger, even in this hard moment. Now, Dawn, can you explain back to us what we mean by this power rehearsal? Handoff.
All right, thank you. So while we're going to help the student in crisis, your other students are in their safe place, and your student leader is going to get up and lead them through a rule rehearsal. But this is different. They're going to do rule 1, then they're going to do rule 5, rule 2, and rule 5. And they'll continue through that sequence because we really want to emphasize rule 5, make our dear team stronger.
You got it, Dawn. And if you think about this, the kid in crisis could be hypersensitive to the kids around him or her, right? And even when, Bobby's not really looking at the kid in crisis is screaming, Bobby, stop looking at me. Well, when we give them a structured task like this power rehearsal, it gets all of your students really focused on something. So that frees the student in crisis and the teacher to really have that one-on-one connection to mitigate what's happening in that moment. So that's super powerful, something to keep in mind. Now, we didn't say this, so let's add on to this. So after your Strong Five leaders goes through the entire power rehearsal, if the crisis is still going on and the teacher is still tied up, that Strong Five student leader is going to select the next student to go through the power rehearsal. So Dawn, explain that back.
Yeah, so let's say that we're working with our student and the student leader has gone through all of those rules and we're still working with the student. They'll select the next student that's going to be the leader for the role rehearsal.
You got it. All right. So that is what Strong Five Phase 1 looks like. And we're going to park it there because next week, part 2, we're going to uncover phases 2 and 3 and really talk about how the teacher shows up for the kid in crisis. And we'll give you some really great strategies for, again, hoping to de-escalate and come back to a more steady state for the entire class. All right, we're going to go ahead and bring Weston back into the studio. I'm really pumped to see what he has to share with us. So, Weston, how's it going?
Great, thank you, Andre.
Awesome. Do you have some burning questions for us?
We do. I'm pulling it up. Lakidra early on asked, can we replace upset with any feeling, or does upset cover all?
Hey, Lakidra, good to have you here. Great question. I'm going to see if I can do some fancy StreamYard stuff, and I'm going to go and try and pull her question. Let's see. Okay. That's not that specific question. That's cool. But we'll take it. All right. So the question is, I think using the word upset kind of covers so much, right? Because the upset can be, turning into large behaviors, but the upset can turn into really low-level behaviors. And so using the word upset to kind of generalize all behaviors that recognize that the student is functioning in their lower centers of their brain makes a lot of good sense. Weston, do you think I tackled that question? Excellent. Give us another one.
Um, Carla
I'm
said,
just going to
"What if
put
you
this
have?"
one up and keep it up. All right. When Chris Biffle uses the word genius,
Yes.
you got to make record of this. All right, Weston, what was that next question?
Carla asked, "What if you have 3 kids shutting down at the same time? How does this work? I had this past school year. Who are you going to first?"
Great question. And, we talk in whole brain teaching a lot about mirror neurons. And essentially, our brains are wired in a way where we automatically mimic the things we see, hear, and feel. And it is not uncommon for one kid to go into their lower centers of their brain, and that then disrupts the brain states of all other students or some other students in the classroom as well. And so when this happens, this can get really tricky. It is important that you go to where the biggest risk is being displayed and throw your support in that moment with that specific student. And the idea there is that we sort of reduce the upset, and then that will hopefully have an effect on the other students as well. And again, use your school-wide protocol for this. It is possible that you'll need extra help in that classroom. So great question. Very valid too. All right. Any others?
We just had one come in that says, "Do you recommend practicing this at the beginning of the year without knowing any identified students that might have meltdowns?"
Yeah, that is such a good question. And it's something I've thought about. It's almost like you don't really want to dangle this unknown factor in the classroom if you're not certain that you're going to even have to worry about it, right? And you don't want to give, these ideas. So I would say get to know your class. Um, and if you see that, okay, this is something that might really benefit our classroom culture just to have this plan and practice it, I think, again, it goes back to your teacher intuition guiding that and really getting to know your students and your class as a whole. Dawn, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback off of this. I've taught my class Strong 5, even though I didn't have this disruptive behavior, but my kids would use it if maybe another student from a different class was in the bathroom being loud and I had to step out of the room to help that student or run quick to the copy machine, or maybe if another adult came in for me to talk to. Anytime I was disengaged from our lesson, they would start it. And half the time they would start it without me even reminding them. Some student would just take the lead and they would start doing it until I was able to come back and rejoin the class. So it's designed for students in crisis, but it can really be used anytime you need to step away from your lesson.
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought up that point, Dawn. Yes, it's being framed as responding to a kid in crisis, but just like Dawn is saying, we can use this with any kid that, again, is upset. And that can manifest in a multitude of ways. Weston, anything else?
Thank you, Andre. No, it looks like you crushed it.
All right. Well, thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Weston, for helping me crush it. Next week, we're going to really unpack, like I said, phases 2 and 3, which will put a lot of focus on what we do when we're there with the kid in crisis. And so I'm really excited about that. That's where I feel like the meat of all of this Strong 5 is going to be. So all we've done today is kind of looked inside the brain of a kid in crisis by using the upstairs, downstairs analogy. And we've also talked about phase 1, how to sort of secure safety for your class to allow you, the teacher, to respond to the kid in crisis. So thank you all for being here. If you haven't, please go out on Amazon and get this second edition. It is truly amazing. And we'll all see you next week. Bye, everybody.